I am considering leaving my wife who cheated on me 15 years ago because our kids are now in college. The affair lasted 2 weeks. I found out because she left her phone on the kitchen island and a message popped up. Just 2 lines, but it was enough. When I confronted Sarah that night, she didn't deny it. She cried and begged and promised it was over. Our twin daughters, Qley and Megan, were 3 years old then. They were sleeping down the hall in their shared bedroom with a nightlight shaped like a star. I packed a bag that same night, got as far as the driveway before I turned around. Not because I forgave her, but because I kept picturing the girls waking up asking where Daddy went. I couldn't do it. Sarah did everything right after that. She went to therapy, cut off all contact with the guy, and gave me her passwords. We went to couples counseling every Wednesday at 5:30 for 2 years straight. The counselor's office smelled like eucalyptus and had this clock that ticked so loud I could barely focus. Slowly, things got better. We started laughing again, having date nights, taking the girls to the park on Saturdays. By year 5, I could say I loved her again and mostly mean it, but I never forgot. Every anniversary, every vacation photo, every time she smiled at me across the dinner table, there was this tiny voice in the back of my head. She did that thing. She chose someone else. Even when things were good, really good, that voice was there. The girls turned 18 4 months ago. We threw them a joint birthday party in our backyard and ordered too much pizza. Their friends stayed until midnight. Both of them got acceptance letters to universities 3 hours away. Different schools, but same distance. They moved into their dorms 6 weeks ago. The house has been quiet ever since. Last Tuesday, I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot. I had just bought milk and bread and those frozen dinners Sarah likes. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from my daughter, Qley. Her and her roommate making ramen at 2 o'clock in the morning. Both of them laughing. I stared at that photo for 10 minutes. They didn't need me anymore. Not like before. That's when it hit me. I had stayed for them. I had rebuilt my marriage for them. 15 years of trying to forget, trying to move past it, all so they could have a stable home. And I did it. They grew up happy. They never saw their parents fighting or separating. I gave them that. But what about me? I drove home and Sarah was watching some cooking show on the couch. She smiled when I walked in and asked if I remembered to get the ice cream. I had Rocky Road, her favorite. I put the groceries away and sat down next to her. She leaned against my shoulder like she always does, and that voice in my head got louder. I started researching divorce lawyers 3 days ago, just looking, reading reviews. One guy named Mark had his office downtown above a bookstore. Another woman named Elena specialized in amicable separations. I cleared my browser history after. Sarah has no idea. We went to dinner Friday night at that French bistro we've been going to for years. She ordered the same steak she always gets. We talked about the girls. I was about how Qley was struggling in her chemistry class and how Megan joined the hiking club. Sarah reached across the table and held my hand. She told me she was glad we made it through the hard years together. Glad we didn't give up. I squeezed her hand back and said nothing. Yesterday I was cleaning out the garage and found an old box of photos. There was one from our wedding. We were so young. Another from the hospital the day the girls were born. Sarah was holding both of them looking exhausted and happy. There were dozens more. First steps, first day of kindergarten, beach trips, Christmas mornings. I put the box back and called Mark's office. I left a voicemail asking about a consultation. I haven't heard back yet. The phone rang while I was standing in the kitchen. I was staring at the spot on the island where that message had popped up 15 years ago. It's funny how the brain works. I've renovated this kitchen twice since then. New granite, new backsplash, new lighting. But in my mind's eye, that old cracked screen is still lying there on the cheap laminate we used to have. This is Mark's office, a woman's voice said. She was professional, clip, the kind of voice that handles endings every day before lunch. We have an opening Thursday at 10 a.m. Does that work for you, Mr. Miller? Yes, I said. My voice sounded thin, like a radio station losing its signal. That works. I hung up and looked at the clock. 4:15 p.m. Sarah would be home in 20 minutes. She'd walk through the door. I'd kick off her heels, the ones with the scuffed left toe she refuses to throw away, and ask me what I wanted for dinner. She would be completely, blissfully unaware that the foundation she thought we'd spent 15 years pouring concrete over was actually just a hollow shell. That night, she wanted to look at new curtains for the living room. The girls' rooms are empty, and she's entered this frantic nesting phase, trying to reclaim the space that was once dominated by Taylor Swift posters and discarded hoodies. What do you think of the sage green, David? She asked, holding her tablet up. It's calming. We could use some calm, couldn't we? Just the two of us. I looked at the green fabric on the screen. It looked like moss on a grave. It's fine, Sarah, I said. Just fine? She laughed, a light and genuine sound that used to make my heart skip. Now, it just felt like a physical weight in my chest. You've been so quiet lately. Are you missing the girls that much? We can drive up this weekend if you want. Take them out for a real meal. I'm just tired, I lied. I've become a world-class liar over the last decade and a half. People talk about the betrayal of the cheater, but nobody talks about the quiet, corrosive lying the forgiving spouse has to do just to keep the peace. I lied every time I said, I love you too. I lied every time I held her hand at a wedding and pretended I still believed in forever. I lied every time I let her think the wound had healed when really I had just learned how to walk with a permanent limp. Thursday morning came with a heavy gray drizzle. I told Sarah I had a meeting with a vendor across town. I put on my best suit. I wanted to feel like a man making a power move, not a man running away from a ghost. Mark's office was exactly as I'd imagined, smelling of old paper and expensive coffee. He was a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a surprisingly kind smile. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a gardener who specialized in pulling up dead stumps. 15 years, Mark said, leaning back in his leather chair after I gave him the briefest summary possible. He didn't ask for the dirty details. He'd seen enough of them to fill a library. That's a long time to carry a bag you've already packed, David. I didn't want to break the girls, I said, my hands gripped tight in my lap. They're good kids. They're happy. If I'd left when they were 3, I don't know who they'd be today. I wanted them to have the porch, the 2 parents, the stable ground. I gave them 15 years of stability. And now? Mark asked. Now they're on their own ground, I replied. And I realized I've been standing on a sinkhole this whole time. He walked me through the numbers. The house, the 401k, the savings accounts we'd built for the girls' weddings. It was all so clinical. Sarah had stayed home for 5 years when the twins were small, then went back to work as a paralegal. The split would be almost exactly down the middle. In 30 minutes, he'd mapped out the destruction of a 2-decade-long life together. When I walked out of that office, the rain had stopped, but the air was cold. I drove to a park near the girls' old elementary school. And I sat on a bench and watched a mother push her toddler on the swings. The kid was screaming with joy. I remembered Megan doing that, how she'd throw her head back and yell, "Higher, Daddy, higher!" I had been a hero to them. That was the trade-off. By staying, I got to remain the hero. If I'd left back then, I would have been the dad who lived in the apartment with the mismatched furniture and saw them every other weekend. I wouldn't have been there for the 3 a.m. nightmares or the scraped knees or the boyfriends who broke their hearts. I got all of that. But sitting on that bench, I realized the cost. I was 52 years old, and I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly at peace in my own home. My house wasn't a home. It was a museum, dedicated to a version of us that died in 2011. I went home and found Sarah in the kitchen, where she was baking. She always bakes when she misses the girls. The smell of cinnamon and sugar was thick in the air, a smell that should be comforting but felt like an accusation. "David, you're home early," she said, wiping flour off her cheek. She looked beautiful. The years had been kind to her, even if my memory hadn't. She walked over to kiss me, and for the first time in 15 years, I turned my face. She caught my cheek, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" she asked. The lightness vanished from her voice instantly. She has a sixth sense for my moods, a leftover survival instinct from the years she spent walking on eggshells after her affair. "We need to talk," I said. It's the most cliched sentence in the English language, but there's no other way to say it. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where we'd done 1,000 homework assignments and eaten 1,000 Sunday roasts. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just told her. "I went to see a lawyer today, Sarah." The color drained from her face so fast, it was like a physical blow. She didn't say why, she knew why. She looked at her hands, then at the wedding ring she's never taken off since that Wednesday in the eucalyptus-scented office. "The girls are gone, David," she whispered. "Is that what this is? You were just waiting for them to leave? I gave you 15 years, I said, and my voice finally broke. "I tried. I swear to God I tried. I went to the dinners, I went to the counseling, I took the vacations. I wanted to be the man who could forgive and forget, but I'm just the man who could stay. I thought we were happy," she sobbed. "The last 5 years, they were so good, weren't they?" "They were," I admitted, and that was the hardest part. They were good. If she had been a monster, if she had kept cheating, if she had been a terrible mother, this would be easy. But she had been a perfect wife for 5,475 days. She had spent 15 years trying to pay back a debt that I finally realized was unpayable. "I can't keep pretending that the debt is settled, Sarah. Every time I look at you, I still see that text message. I still see the 2 weeks where I didn't exist to you. I've spent 15 years being a father. I don't know how to just be your husband anymore." She didn't fight me. She didn't scream. She just sat there in her flour-stained apron and wept for the life we had built on top of a ruin. I moved into a small apartment 3 miles away the following week. It has white walls, a view of a parking lot, and no history. It's cold and quiet. Qley called me last night. She was crying. "How could you do this now, Dad? After everything? Why now? How do you explain to your daughter that her entire childhood was a gift bought with her father's slow-motion heartbreak? How do you tell her that the stable home she remembers was actually a 15-year-long game of endurance?" "I'm sorry, Qley," I said. I'm tired. I'm sitting on my new sofa now. It's gray and stiff. There are no photos on the walls. The voice in my head is finally quiet, but the silence it left behind is deafening. I keep waiting to feel the freedom the brochures and the blogs promised. Instead, I just feel empty. I did what I said I'd do. I stayed until they were grown. I fulfilled the contract. But as I look at the dark screen of my phone, I realize that when you spend 15 years living for everyone else, you forget how to live for yourself. The grocery store receipt from my last trip with Sarah is still in my wallet. Milk, bread, frozen dinners, and Rocky Road ice cream. I wonder if she ever ate it. I wonder if it's still sitting in the freezer, melting and refreezing, getting harder and more bitter with every passing day, just like us. The first Thanksgiving in the apartment felt less like a holiday and more like a recovery period after a long illness. I didn't buy a turkey. I bought a rotisserie chicken from the store and a small container of mashed potatoes that tasted like salt and cardboard. The silence was so heavy I could feel it in my ears. Qley and Megan had decided to stay at the house with Sarah. They weren't exactly taking sides. They were just existing in the only home they'd ever known. I didn't blame them. To them, I was the one who pulled the plug. I was the one who looked at their mother after 15 years of apparent peace and decided she wasn't enough anymore. They didn't see the ghost I'd been living with. They only saw the man who broke their mom's heart right as they were trying to start their own lives. I sent a group text at noon. "Happy Thanksgiving, girls. Love you both. Hope the food is good." Qley replied 3 hours later with a single heart emoji. Megan didn't reply at all. I spent the afternoon staring at a crack in the ceiling of my bedroom. It looked like a lightning bolt. I thought about the hard years Sarah had mentioned at the bistro. To her, the hard years were the ones right after the affair. The crying, the therapy, the rebuilding. To me, the hard years were the ones that followed. The years where I had to pretend that a shattered vase, once glued back together, is just as good as a whole one. It isn't. You always see the lines. You're always careful about how much water you put in it, terrified it'll leak. In December, Megan called. Not to chat, but to ask if I was coming to their winter choir concert. "I'll be there, Meg," I said. "Front row, just like always." "Mom's gonna be there," she said. Her voice was flat, wary. "She's been really down, Dad. Like, really down. She barely eats." "I know," I said. And I did know. I felt the guilt like a dull ache in my joints, but underneath it there was a terrifying sense of relief. For 15 years, I had carried the burden of her mistake. Now, for the first time, she had to carry the weight of the consequence. It felt fair, and it felt horrible all at once. The concert was held in a massive, drafty auditorium at the university. I arrived early, my coat buttoned to my chin. I saw Sarah almost immediately. She was sitting 3 rows back, wearing a coat I'd bought her for her 40th birthday. She looked smaller, greener. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She just nodded, a slow, painful acknowledgement of the strangers we had become. After the show, the lobby was a sea of parents and students. I found the girls near a giant Christmas tree. They hugged me, but it was different, shorter, less leaning. "You look thin, Dad," Qley said, adjusting my scarf. "Just the lighting," I lied. Sarah approached us then. The air between us felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. "David," she said. "Sarah, the girls and I were going to get some hot chocolate at that place on the corner," she said, her eyes searching mine for something, permission maybe, or a sign of regret. Would you like to join us? Just for a bit?" I looked at my daughters. They were watching me, holding their breath. This was the moment. I could go. I could sit in a booth, drink lukewarm cocoa, and play the part of the amicable ex-husband. We could transition into that modern family phase where everyone is mature and the past is buried under a layer of polite conversation. But I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit across from the person who had rewritten my life story without my consent and pretend that I was okay with the new ending. "I can't," I said softly. The light in Sarah's eyes didn't just go out, it shattered. Megan's face hardened. She took a step toward her mother, physically shielding her from me. "We should go, Mom," Megan said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. I watched them walk away. 3 women linked together, leaving me standing by a plastic tree in a crowd of happy strangers. I had traded my family's warmth for my own truth. It was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought. I drove back to the apartment in total silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires on the slushy road. When I got inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and looked at my hands. I had stayed for 15 years. I had done my duty. I had been the good man. And now, at 52, I was standing in a room that didn't know my name, realizing that while I had saved my daughter's childhoods, I might have lost them in the process. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from a memory app. 7 years ago today. I clicked it. It was a video of us in the backyard. The girls were 11. Sarah was laughing, trying to flip a pancake on the portable griddle we'd set up. She missed, and the pancake landed on the dog's head. We were all hysterical. I was the one filming. You could hear my laugh behind the camera, deep, easy, and full of a joy that felt completely real in that moment. I watched it 3 times. That was the trick of it all. It was real. The happiness wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We had been happy, and I had been broken. Both things occupied the same space for a decade and a half. I put the phone down and walked to the window. In the apartment across the street, a man was putting up Christmas lights. He was struggling with a tangled strand, swearing under his breath, while a woman stood behind him, pointing and laughing. I wondered what their secret was. Or maybe they didn't have one yet. Maybe their phone on the kitchen island moment just hadn't happened. Or maybe it had, and he was the one who was better at forgetting than I was. I went to the kitchen and opened the freezer. Empty, except for a tray of ice and a box of frozen waffles. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before she picked up. David? Sarah's voice was thick. I like she'd been crying. I'm not coming back, Sarah, I said. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I need you to understand that. This isn't a break. It's the end. There was a long silence. I could hear the muffled sounds of the girls talking in the background at the cafe. I know, she whispered. I think I've known for 15 years. I just hoped I could outrun it. I did too, I said. I really did. We hung up. No, goodbye. No, see you soon. Just the click of 2 people finally letting go of a rope they'd been straining against until their hands were raw. I sat down at my small, cheap dining table and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I wrote 1 word at the top, tomorrow. Then I started a list of things I needed to buy. A rug, some lamps, maybe a plant that was hard to kill. And I didn't know what the rest of my life looked like. And for the first time since I was 37 years old, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. It had already fallen. I was still standing. The snow had finally melted, leaving the world looking gray and salt-stained. By April, the apartment felt less like a waiting room and more like a home, though a sparse one. I had bought a monstera plant that sat in the corner, its large leaves reaching for the weak spring sun. I watered it every Sunday at 10 a.m., a new ritual to replace the old ones. I was sitting at a small cafe downtown, stirring a black coffee. I was waiting for Megan. We hadn't spoken properly since the choir concert. She had sent short functional texts about tax documents or mail that had arrived at the house, but the warmth was gone, and she was the one who took it the hardest. Qley was the mediator, the one who tried to see both sides, but Megan was a mirror of my own stubbornness. She saw loyalty as absolute. When she walked in, she didn't smile. She sat down, keeping her light jacket on, her backpack slumped on the floor next to her. She looked so much like Sarah, it made my chest ache. The same tilt of the chin, the same way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear. You look good, Dad, she said, though her tone suggested she was disappointed by the fact. She probably wanted me to look as haggard as I felt. I'm doing okay, Meg. How's school? The hiking club? It's fine. Everything is fine, she said, waving a hand dismissively. She stared at me for a long beat, her green eyes hard. I didn't come here to talk about hiking, Dad. Mom is a wreck. But she's selling the house. She says it's too big, but we know it's because she can't stand being in the kitchen alone. She cries every time we're home. I look down at my coffee. I know it's hard. It's hard for me too. Is it? She snapped. The anger came out fast, like a physical thing. Because you're the one who walked. After 20-something years, you just decided you were tired? People get tired in marriages, Dad. They don't just dump their wives because the kids went to college. It feels calculated, like you were just punching a clock until you could quit. I took a breath. This was the moment I had dreaded for 15 years. I had protected them from the truth to give them a perfect childhood. But in doing so, I had made myself the villain of their adulthood. Megan, there are things about our marriage you don't know, I said quietly. Things that happened a long time ago. Like what? Did you have someone else? No, I said firmly. Never. But 15 years ago, your mother made a mistake. A big one. She had an affair. It didn't last long, but it changed everything for me. The silence that followed was different from the silence in my apartment. It was heavy, vibrating with the sound of the espresso machine and the low chatter of the other tables. Megan's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked like I had just told her the sky was actually purple. Mom, she whispered. No, she's obsessed with you. She talks about you like you're a saint. She worked very hard to fix it, I said, trying to be fair even now. She did everything a person could do to earn back trust, and for a long time I thought she had. But when you and Qley left, I realized I hadn't been staying for her. I'd been staying for the family, for you. I didn't want you to grow up in 2 houses. I didn't want you to wonder why your parents couldn't stand to be in the same room. Megan leaned back, her face pale. So, all those years, the trips to the lake, the Christmases, the way you guys would dance in the kitchen while making dinner, was that all fake? No, I said, and I felt a tear finally prick at my eye. That's the part I can't explain. It wasn't fake. I loved her. I still love her in a way, but the trust was gone, Meg. It's like a bone that heals wrong. You can still walk on it, you can even run on it, but every time the weather changes you feel the pain. And for 15 years, the weather never stopped changing. Megan looked away, watching a car pass by the window. Her anger seemed to have leaked out of her, replaced by a hollow, confused sadness. She was seeing her entire life through a new lens, reevaluating every smile, every hug, every I love you she'd ever heard us exchange. I wish you hadn't told me, she said, her voice small. I wish I didn't have to, I replied, but I can't let you hate me for a reason that isn't true. I'm not a hero, Megan. I'm just a man who ran out of strength. She stayed for another 20 minutes, but we didn't talk about the affair anymore. We talked about her classes, about the mundane details of life. When we stood up to leave, she didn't give me the cold, short hug from the concert. She held on for a second longer, her head resting on my shoulder. I'm still mad at you, she whispered into my coat. I know, I said. I'm mad at me, too. I watched her walk to her car, her shoulders slumped. I felt a crushing weight of guilt. I had finally transferred part of my burden to her. She now had to live with the knowledge of her mother's fallibility. I had traded her ignorance for my own vindication, and it felt like a dirty trade. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to a local bar, a place with dim lights and sticky floors where nobody knew me. I sat at the end of the bar and ordered a beer. A woman sat 2 stools away. She looked to be about my age, with tired eyes eyes and a kind face. She was reading a paperback book while she sipped a glass of wine. After a while, she looked up and caught me staring. Good book? I asked. My voice felt rusty. It's okay, she said, smiling slightly. A bit overdramatic, lots of secrets and betrayals, you know, the usual. I think I've had enough of those for one lifetime, I said. She laughed, a low, earthy sound. Haven't we all? I'm Elena. David, I said. We talked for an hour. Not about our pasts, not about our children, or our exes. We talked about music, about the city, about how hard it is to find a decent tomato in April. It was the first time in 15 years I had spoken to a woman without the shadow of Sarah standing between us. It was light. It was easy. When I walked back to my apartment that night, the air was cool and smelled of damp earth and coming rain. I thought about Sarah, probably sitting in our old living room, surrounded by boxes as she prepared to leave the house we built. I felt a twinge of sadness for her, but for the first time, it didn't pull me back. I entered my apartment and turned on the lamp. The monstera was still there, its leaves a vibrant, stubborn green. I sat on my stiff sofa and closed my eyes. The silence was still there, but it didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. It felt like space. I am considering leaving my wife who cheated on me 15 years ago now that our kids are in college. The affair lasted 2 weeks. I found out because she left her phone on the kitchen island and a message popped up. Just 2 lines, but it was enough. When I confronted Sarah that night, she didn't deny it. She cried and begged and promised it was over. Our twin daughters, Qley and Megan, were 3 years old then. They were sleeping down the hall in their shared bedroom with the nightlight shaped like a star. I packed a bag that same night. You got as far as the driveway before I turned around. Not because I forgave her, but because I kept picturing the girls waking up asking where Daddy went. I couldn't do it. Sarah did everything right after that. She went to therapy, cut off all contact with the guy, and gave me her passwords. We went to couples counseling every Wednesday at 5:30 for 2 years straight. The counselor's office smelled like eucalyptus and had this clock that ticked so loud I could barely focus. Slowly, things got better. We started laughing again, having date nights, taking the girls to the park on Saturdays. By year 5, I could say I loved her again, and mostly mean it, but I never forgot. Every anniversary, every vacation photo, every time she smiled at me across the dinner table, there was this tiny voice in the back of my head. She did that thing, so she chose someone else. Even when things were good, really good, that voice was there. The girls turned 18 4 months ago. We threw them a joint birthday party in our backyard and ordered too much pizza. Their friends stayed until midnight. Both of them got acceptance letters to universities 3 hours away. Different schools, but same distance. They moved into their dorms 6 weeks ago. The house has been quiet ever since. Last Tuesday, I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot. I had just bought milk and bread and those frozen dinners Sarah likes. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from my daughter, Qley. Her and her roommate making ramen at 2 o'clock in the morning. Both of them laughing. I stared at that photo for 10 minutes. They didn't need me anymore. Not like before. That's when it hit me. I had stayed for them. I had rebuilt my marriage for them. 15 years of trying to forget, trying to move past it, all so they could have a stable home. And I did it. They grew up happy. They never saw their parents fighting or separating. I gave them that. But what about me? I drove home and Sarah was watching some cooking show on the couch. She smiled when I walked in and asked if I remembered to get the ice cream. I had Rocky Road, her favorite. I put the groceries away and sat down next to her. She leaned against my shoulder like she always does, and that voice in my head got louder. I started researching divorce lawyers 3 days ago. Just looking, reading reviews. One guy named Mark had his office downtown above a bookstore. Another woman named Elena specialized in amicable separations. I cleared my browser history after. Sarah has no idea. We went to dinner Friday night at that French bistro we've been going to for years. She ordered the same steak she always gets. We talked about the girls, about how Qley was struggling in her chemistry class, and how Megan joined the hiking club. Sarah reached across the table and held my hand. She told me she was glad we made it through the hard years together. Glad we didn't give up. I squeezed her hand back and said nothing. Yesterday I was cleaning out the garage and found an old box of photos. There was one from our wedding. We were so young. Another from the hospital the day the girls were born. Sarah was holding both of them, looking exhausted and happy. There were dozens more. First steps, first day of kindergarten, beach trips, Christmas mornings. I put the box back and called Mark's office. I left a voicemail asking about a consultation. I haven't heard back yet. The house sale closing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late May. I pulled into the lawyer's parking lot, the same one where I'd met Mark months ago, but today we were meeting at a neutral title office. The sun was out, blindingly bright, reflecting off the glass of the office buildings downtown. It felt like the kind of day where something new should be beginning, but all I was doing was officially burying the old. Sarah was already there. She was standing by the entrance, wearing a floral dress I'd seen her wear a dozen times. She looked fragile, like a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. "Hi, David," she said. Her voice was steady, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hi, Sarah." We sat in a conference room that felt too small for the 20 years of history we were signing away. The real estate agent was chirping about market trends and great timing, oblivious to the fact that every document she slid across the table felt like a heavy stone. I watched Sarah's hand tremble as she signed the deed. This was the house where the girls took their first steps. The house where we'd hidden the star nightlight in a box when they decided they were too old for it. When the last paper was signed, the agent shook our hands and left. We were alone in the room. "I found that nightlight," Sarah said suddenly. "The star one. It was behind the shelf in the girls' closet. I put it in a box for Qley. I thought maybe one day she'd want it for her own kids." I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my throat. "That was a good idea." "David," she looked up then, her eyes swimming. "I'm moving into the condo on Friday. If there's anything else you realized you wanted from the garage, tell me now. Otherwise, I'm letting the junk haulers take the rest. I have what I need," I said. I walked her to her car. It was an old habit, one I couldn't quite shake. When we got to her driver's side door, she turned to me. "I talked to Megan. She told me you told her. About why?" I braced myself for the anger, the accusations of poisoning our children against her. "I'm glad you did," she whispered. "I spent 15 years trying to be the perfect wife because I was terrified of this day. I thought if I was good enough, you'd eventually stop seeing the ghost. I realized lately that it wasn't fair to ask you to be blind. I'm sorry I made you carry that for so long." She got in the car and drove away. I stood in the parking lot for a long time, the heat of the pavement radiating through the soles of my shoes. I felt a strange, hollow peace. The debt was settled, not because she had paid it, but because I had finally stopped trying to collect it. That Friday, I had my first real date with Elena. I picked her up at 7 o'clock. I had washed my car and even bought a new shirt. I felt like a teenager, nervous and slightly ridiculous. We went to a small Italian place, not the French bistro. I didn't want any ghosts at the table. Elena looked lovely in the candlelight. No floral dresses, no history of shared mortgages, just a woman with her own stories and her own scars. You look like you're thinking about something far away, she said, resting her chin on her hand. Just thinking about how quiet my apartment is, I said, smiling, and how for the first time I don't mind the silence. It takes a while to get used to the sound of your own thoughts, she agreed. But once you do, they're usually better company than you expect. We talked about everything and nothing. We laughed. I didn't have to check a voice in the back of my head. I didn't have to wonder if she was thinking about someone else. We were just two people eating pasta in a city that felt slightly larger and more full of possibility than it had a week ago. As the night ended and I walked her to her door, my phone buzzed. I ignored it until I got back to my car. It was a photo from Megan. She and Qley were sitting on the steps of the empty house, eating pizza out of a box. They looked sad, but they were together. Underneath, she had written, "It's weird seeing it empty, but we're okay, Dad. See you Sunday." I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the photo. The house was empty. The marriage was over, and the hero's cape I'd worn for 15 years was folded up in a box somewhere in the back of my mind. I started the car and put it in gear. I wasn't going home to a museum anymore. I was just going to the place where I live. The Star nightlight was gone, but for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark.